My name is Eleanor Brooks, and I'm 72 years old. I live in a cedar-sided house on Birch Street in Maple Ridge, Ohio, where the kitchen clock ticks like it's knitting a scarf for winter. Last Tuesday, my son, David, stood by my stove while the kettle hissed and laughed, actually laughed, when I said I still had my own money. "Mom," he said, light as lint, "at your age, what do you even need it for?" The question hung in the steam between us. He kissed my cheek the way you pat a mailbox, brief, ownership implied, and said he'd handle the yard. The door clicked behind him, and the house settled back into its ordinary music. Refrigerator hum, wind nudging the chimes my late husband used to claim were off-key until he learned the tune. 3 days later, the bank called. The manager's voice was polite the way a person is when they aren't sure how much you know about your own life. There had been a request to add an authorized user to my savings, and before they proceeded, they needed my approval. He read a name from his screen, David Brooks. I turned down the burner and listened to the kettle quiet itself. In the steady tone I keep for funerals and new beginnings, I told him I'd be in tomorrow morning. He said he'd be there at 9. I wrote the time in my notebook because paper doesn't smirk. Rain made a soft grammar on the roof when I woke. In my working years as a bookkeeper, numbers behaved best before noon. That habit still lives in my bones. I put on a plain sweater and Lily's lopsided scarf, the one with brave stitches, and wrote the date at the top of my notebook, October 15th. Going to the bank. Bring ID. Ask for Mr. Turner. The ritual calmed me, the way measuring flour calms a pie. Maple Ridge National sits between the barber and the bakery. Its windows ripple a little when morning light comes down Main Street, like the glass remembers older air. Inside smelled the way banks do when they still believe in paper. Toner, envelopes, someone's second-best coffee. The teller waved with the shy pride you save for a teacher who once taught you to spell mortgage. Douglas Turner, no one calls him Doug, met me with a careful smile and the posture of a man who keeps his suit on the back of a chair. His office chair wobbled until I found the honest center. He explained their process, a digital request to add an authorized user to my savings. Standard form, standard convenience, not standard for this account without me. "Before we proceed," he said, "we require your consent." "Then you're not proceeding," I said. He nodded like a man who has found his line again. He offered additional protections, fraud alerts, contact verification, a flag requiring in-person ID for any changes. He mentioned durable power of attorney and asked whether I wanted to review beneficiaries. He didn't push. He placed each document in front of me and slid me a pen that still had weight and ink that respected paper. I read. I always read. Words took me through lean years and brought me out of them. I initialed where endings needed beginnings and signed where a name means yes. He notarized with the small ceremony of a notary who still believes in witnesses. When he finished printing confirmations, I asked for one line in a larger font. He knew which. Eleanor M. Brooks, primary account holder. He smiled the way an honest craftsman smiles when a client loves the work. Outside, the clouds were thinning toward a patient light. In the bank window, my reflection hesitated and then held, as if to confirm I still owned my outline. I walked home past the bakery where cinnamon kept its promises and the hardware store where the bell over the door rings like common sense. My house unlocked with the key my husband carried for 48 years. I told it I was back and set the envelope on the kitchen table like a small flag. I boiled water for tea and copied that bold line into my notebook. Not because I doubted the print, but because sometimes the heart needs to see its news twice. On the windowsill, the peeling knife waited with the patience of a familiar tool. The phone sat like a quiet animal, and for once I didn't fear its next trick. Paper belonged to me. So did the next hour. Melissa's car eased into the driveway just after noon. She parks as if feelings might dent the fender. She came in without knocking. Ours has always been a come-in family, and set a bakery box on my counter like a treaty. Apple pie, the neat label said, though the room already knew from the cinnamon. I was nearby, she said, smoothing a sleeve that didn't require smoothing. Thought you might want dessert. I handed her plates because hospitality is its own boundary. We spoke of Lily's school play and the new stop sign on Pine, the ordinary scaffolding people erect when the building matters. Then she approached the thing itself. David's worried, she said, voice careful. Bills, maintenance. He just wants to help. Help asks first, I said. I laid my hand on the envelope, not to display it, but to steady the table's conversation. He's your son. She tried, as if biology were a signature. I know what he is, I said, more gently than the sentence sounds. And I know what I am. She looked toward the maple outside, now shedding early and honest. He's not trying to take anything. He wants access in case has a way of arriving with a clipboard, I said. I'm not a form to be pre-filled. Silence did its useful work. She lifted the pie box lid and let it fall. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, but with strategy, looking for a door it could call a window. Will you talk to him? At 6, I said. If he wants to. Relief and frustration sat side by side on her face like two passengers who don't speak. At the sink, she noticed the peeling knife drying on a towel and smiled without warmth. You still do it the old way? It still works, I said. After she left, the house exhaled. I cut a small slice of pie and tasted kindness that had nothing to do with consent. I rinsed the knife and set it back on the sill. Blade turned inward. Handle forward. The clock counted like it meant to reach a particular minute. And I let it. At 5:50, the phone rang. I let it prove it could be patient. Then answered. Mom, David said, rehearsed. He walked weather to weather, the safe small talk, until the map ended. I heard you went to the bank. I did. He cleared his throat. The old boyhood tell for a story he wanted graded on intention. I just wanted to be ready if something happened. Utilities, emergencies. Utilities take a check, I said. Emergencies take a person. He was quiet long enough to pick up a truth. Why are you being like this? I'm your son. You laughed, I said, not accusing, just arranging the furniture. He said nothing. You laughed when I said I still had my own money. You don't get to laugh and sign for me at the same time. It wasn't like that, he said quickly, and the lie rustled thin as tissue. I could have thrown history at him. The nights I balanced the checkbook with him asleep on my shoulder, the signatures that kept lights on and wolves polite, but motherhood taught me not every fact heals. I opened my notebook instead, not to read, but to remember that lines keep a person from sprawling. I've put protections on my accounts, I said, keeping my voice as steady as a hem. I updated beneficiaries. If you need something, ask me. I will decide. You are my son, not my signature. He blew out a breath that snagged on its frame. So you're cutting me off. I'm not cutting you off, I said. I'm cutting myself free. The line held our breathing the way a shell holds the sea. Then, smaller, he said. I shouldn't have laughed. I know, I said. I don't want your money, he added. Honest, finally. I don't want to lose you. Come Sunday, I said. Help me with the gutters like you promised last fall. Bring Lily. We'll make pie the old way. He exhaled a yes, and the phone became an instrument again instead of a weapon. Lily FaceTimed that night because the moon was shameless. She always calls when the moon refuses to be subtle. She swung her camera toward the silver slice over the garage and then back to her face. young and brave without noticing. "We learned tide charts," she said. "Did you have tide charts when you were a kid?" "We had the actual tide," I said, and she laughed because she expects my answers to wander where they want so long as they come home. She showed me the bracelet I gave her last Christmas, the one with the tiny apple charm, and said she adds a bead every time she learns something useful. "Today I learned to hem a skirt. It's not straight, but it stays. Staying is most of straight," I said. She hesitated, lowering her voice as if the house itself might listen. "Dad's off. He won't say why." "He and I talked," I said. "We'll be fine." "Did he mess up?" "Wrong is a big word," I said. "Let's say he did something before he understood it." She nodded, then bit her lip. "Are you mad?" "I was," I said. Then I remembered anger is a match and I live in a wooden house. Her laugh rang, a small bell unafraid of its own sound. "Do you need anything?" "I need Sunday," I said. "Bring your steady hands. We'll make a mess that deserves its own headline." After we hung up, the rooms felt aired. I set the kettle on and arranged the manila envelope in the drawer with my notebooks, paper with paper, and turned the knife on the sill so the handle faced tomorrow. Night arrived without spectacle, blue deciding to be something deeper. On the porch, the wind lifted the chimes into a tune my husband learned the year he stopped complaining about them. I touched the old gouge in the railing where he'd set the blade too hard once, testing its honesty. The wood had forgiven him. The wood always forgave what was meant to make things workable. Sleep came clean. Morning brought a square of sun on the kitchen table, where the knife marks my boy carved at 12 are now almost art. I ran a cloth over the surface the way you calm a horse. The day knew its part and kept to it. Sunday arrived mild and blue, the kind of Midwestern day that corrects your posture. I cubed butter into flour until it looked like a rumor of snow. Flour on my hands always feels like permission. I wrapped the dough to rest, because rest is where strength agrees to cooperate, and arranged apples in a bowl where they could shine without pretending. At 2, David's truck pulled in. He moved slower than the man who laughed, which I took as progress. "Gutters?" I said, handing him the ladder. "I have a policy, jobs first, talk second. It lets the heart breathe evenly while the mind lines up its words." He worked while I peeled. Apple skins fell in ribbons, a cheap magic I learned from the man who loved me across mortgages and storms. When David came in, hair damp with an honest chore, he watched the red curl fall and asked, "How do you keep it in one piece?" "I don't," I said. "I let it stay itself as long as it can." He rested his hands on a chair back, as if measuring an invisible weight. "About the other day." "I know," I said, laying the knife down, blade away. "What are you going to do differently?" He blinked, surprised by the direction of the road. He took a breath like a man testing a bridge. "Ask," he said, "and listen to the answer." "That would be new," I said, and allowed the gentlest half-smile to exist between us. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and didn't hand it over. "I saw a financial planner. About my planning, not yours." The words were awkward and brave. "I need to figure out responsibility without control." "That's a fine phrase," I said, tossing cinnamon with the apples until the air admitted it had been waiting for it all week. The front door opened and Lily arrived like sunlight with opinions. "I brought ice cream," she announced, and kissed our cheeks in an order that made the kitchen better behaved. She washed her hands and took the knife, and I watched her try to persuade the peel to stay whole. It held long enough to be proud of. When it broke, she laughed. "Staying is most of straight," she said back to me, proving she had heard. We built the pie like a service. Dough rolled, apples mounded, butter dotted, top laid and crimped with my mother's fork. I cut 3 vents: habit, faith, design. David slid the pie into the oven with the care of a man practicing reverence. The kitchen fell into that special silence, anticipation with manners. On the porch, we sat with 3 bowls waiting their future. Leaves let go in slow applause. David glanced at the gouge in the rail the way a man looks at a story he's finally ready to hear. "I shouldn't have laughed," he said. "It was cheap." "Worry gets louder than love," I said. "We turn it down together." Inside, the timer sang a bright, domestic hymn. Lily's little gasp crowned the pie. We ate at the table where the boy once carved his initials, letting ice cream make rivers. No one said account. No one said signature. Quiet did its job. After they left, the house kept a pleasant echo, like a church after the hymn. I washed plates, dried the knife, and turned the handle forward again, a habit that feels like a promise to future me. I opened the notebook because this is how I hold what I've lived. October 15th, again. Because some days earn more than one entry. I wrote what we ate, what we didn't say, how the air felt lighter than Friday's version of itself. Then I wrote the sentence that had been waiting on the porch steps of my mouth. I'm not cutting anyone off. I'm cutting myself free. On paper. The line looked like a horizon, steady and possible. I slid the notebook back into the drawer with the envelope, closed it the way you close a door when no one is in trouble, and made tea that didn't pretend to fix anything. Mrs. Klein's porch light clicked on across the street. She's punctual for someone who tells such wandering stories. I texted Lily, "Next time, your spice blend." 3 apples and a star arrived. The modern amen. I wrote myself a note to copy the recipe for Mrs. Klein. Not the magazine version, but the one that forgives you if your dough is stubborn because you were brave with the cold water. In our bedroom, his old watch lay quiet on the dresser. I don't wind it anymore. I just press the crystal sometimes to see the hands tremble with the memory of purpose. "You'd have liked today," I told him, not to summon a ghost, but to respect a history that makes my sentences true. Sleep took me without argument. Morning returned the kitchen to first draft light. I cut a small slice of leftover pie and stood at the sink where autumn comes in clean. The knife rinsed easily. The handle waited the way good tools wait, ready without being eager. The phone rang mid-morning. Turner from the bank. A final confirmation with a courteous redundancy. Flags placed, notes added, beneficiaries updated per my instructions. "Miss Brooks," he said, "you remain the sole decision-maker. If you ever wish to appoint anyone, you'll tell us in person." "I will," I said. "If I wish." After I hung up, I looked around my kitchen, at the manila envelope, at the apple peels I'd missed in the drain, at the shallow groove in the table where time insists on engraving itself, and felt something like quiet applause from the ordinary. It's funny how you notice the weight of a name only when someone tries to carry it for you. In the afternoon, I walked to the farmer's market for onions and the good eggs. At the stall where a man sells honey and advice, a woman my age argued kindly with a vendor about the price of tomatoes. She winked at me as if we belonged to a guild whose dues are paid in patience. I bought a bag of small apples because abundance is easier to manage when it arrives in modest units. Back home, the mail held a flyer for a seminar about estate planning, printed in a font that wanted to be trusted. I put it in the recycling. I already had what I needed: a banker who knows my name, an attorney who reads without yawning, a notebook that remembers me, and a family learning the difference between access and love. As evening folded the street, I set out 3 mugs, though there were only 2 of us. Habit lives where hope does. The chimes found their old key. I opened the notebook for a last line and, without planning to, added one more. Some things change all at once. Some things change from now on. I closed the book and turned the knife the way I've started turning it, handle toward the future, blade toward the past, and switched off the light. The house, newly instructed, remembered how to rest. Saturday arrived with the kind of light that makes even old paint look forgiving. I'd already been up an hour, sipping coffee by the kitchen window, watching a squirrel make questionable decisions with my bird feeder. When David's truck turned the corner, I felt the smallest flutter of nerves, not fear, not anger, just that restless place between the two. He parked carefully, the way he did as a teenager when he'd just gotten his license and still thought every movement could earn a gold star. When he stepped out, he raised a hand in a half wave that could have meant anything. "Hello, sorry, I'm here." I opened the door before he could knock. "The ladder's in the shed," I said. "The gutters are probably worse than you remember." He nodded. "That's okay. I brought gloves this time." While he worked outside, I gathered apples from the bowl and started peeling. The scent of tart fruit filled the kitchen, wrapping around the edges of the day. Every so often I heard the scrape of the ladder, the thunk of debris hitting the ground, the soft, steady rhythm of someone trying to make things right without saying so. When he came in, hair damp and sleeves rolled, I handed him a glass of water. "You missed a spot," I said. He smiled, a little shy. "You always did have higher standards than gravity." We sat at the table, not directly facing each other. The clock between us did most of the talking. "Finally," he said. "Mom, I was wrong. About the money. About all of it." I looked down at the table, at the faint grooves where his boyhood initials still lived under the varnish. "You weren't wrong to care," I said. "Just wrong about what care looks like." He rubbed a thumb along the rim of his glass. "I didn't mean to make you feel small." "You didn't make me feel small," I said. "You reminded me I'd gotten quiet. That's not the same thing." He nodded, eyes wet in the way a man's get when pride and regret have to share a chair. "I talked to someone, a financial planner. About my accounts, not yours. I figured it was time I handled my own house before trying to fix yours." "That's progress," I said softly. He laughed then, just enough to let the air move again. "Maybe next week we can go over your roof. I promise not to touch a single document." "I'll hold you to that," I said. The oven timer chimed, the second pie of the week, because forgiveness sometimes needs leftovers. I set it on the counter to cool, and the cinnamon filled every corner of the room like an unspoken truce. Lily texted right then, a photo of her bracelet with a new bead. "Staying. Straight?" The message read. I typed back, "Staying is most of straight. Proud of you." David read over my shoulder and smiled. "She's got your backbone." "She's got her own," I said. "That's better." We ate pie without ceremony, forks clinking in a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like healing. When he stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. "You know," he said, "you've always been the strongest person I know." I touched his arm lightly. "Strength is just experience wearing comfortable shoes." He laughed, and for the first time in weeks, the sound didn't hurt. After he left, I rinsed the dishes, dried the knife, and turned the handle toward me. The chimes outside caught the evening wind, their song softer now, certain. I opened my notebook and wrote, October 18th, David fixed the gutters. We fixed the air, then, beneath it, the sentence that has stayed true every day since, I am not cutting anyone off. I am cutting myself free. The clock ticked once, clean, final, content.